Hello everyone. Nice to be speaking to you in this medium. I hope you're all well. This week's Parsha is Parshat Bo. Very exciting Parsha. Am Yisrael leaving Mitzrayim, Yetziat Mitzrayim, Makat Bechorot, Korban Pesach, all sorts of exciting things. And there is one area which seems to be a little bit of a side issue. Meaning if a whole nation are leaving the biggest empire in the world, they're escaping from Mitzrayim after a series of earth-shattering plagues. Why is it that we're concerned with the fact that they asked their neighbors as they left for silver, gold, and some clothing? Now, supposedly that's a very a side issue. It's not really that important. But if we look in the Torah, this fact appears 3 times. It appears originally at the burning bush when Hashem speaks to Moshe at the snare. He says that I will put my favor or the favor of these people in the eyes of the Mitzrim. V'natati et chem ha'am hazeh b'nei Mitzrayim. And when they leave, Lo telchu rekam, they won't go on their own, they won't go empty-handed, but rather, V'sha'ala isha mishchenta u'migarat beita klei chesef u'chlei zahav u'smalot. Each woman should ask from her neighbor and from people around her gold, silver vessels, and clothing. And it appears again in this week's Parsha, just after Moshe warns Paro about Makat Bechorot. It says, Daberna bo'oznei ha'am, please speak to the people and say, V'yishalu ish me'et re'ehu, v'isha me'et ru'uta klei chesef cholei zahav. And the last thing is when it actually happens, again, in the midst of Yetziat Mitzrayim, one of the most dramatic points in the Torah, we're told, V'nei Yisrael asu kidvar Moshe, Perek Yud Bet, Pasuk Lamed Hey. Yes, Am Yisrael actually did this. V'yishalu me'Mitzrayim, and sure enough, Hashem Natan et Chem ha'am b'nei Mitzrayim. Hashem made sure that the Egyptian people accepted this. Vayashilum, they gave it to them. Vaynatzlu et Mitzrayim. Why is this such a central part of Yetziat Mitzrayim? So many Mefarshim connect it to a pasuk which we find in Brit Bein HaBetzarim, back in Bereshit. B'kiyot Torah people, which parak was that? You should know. Where Hashem tells Abraham that his descendants will be enslaved 400 years, and then he says after that, "V'gam et hagoy asher ya'avodu dan anochi," I will judge, I will punish the people who've enslaved them. Va'achareichen yetzu berchush gadol, and Am Yisrael will leave with great possessions, with great wealth. Okay, so Hashem promised it to Abraham, and therefore he has to complete it. That only raises the question: why is it that Hashem promised it to Abraham? So some of the Mefarshim go in the way of the Gemara, the Rabbeinu B'chayai. It's based on the Gemara in Sanhedrin. Gemara in Sanhedrin tells an interesting story. The time of Alexander the Great, Alexandros Mokdon, the Egyptians came before him and said, look, it says in the Torah that the Jews, when they left, they took all this gold and silver and stuff. We want it back. It belongs to us. Maybe they're basing themselves on the fact that the pasuk says Vayashi ilum, as if they lent it to them. It wasn't a gift. We want it back. So the Chachamim at the time didn't know what to do. There's this guy who appears in various stories in the Gemara called Gevia ben Pesisa, who obviously wasn't a top-notch guy. He wasn't their brightest chap. He wasn't one of the Chachamim. And he says, let me go and I'll discuss it with them. If they win, well, you can say, hi, you beat some regular Joe Schmo, not somebody important. And if I win, we'll say Torat Moshe Rabbeinu was the one that won. Okay, so off he went, and he said to the Egyptians, where do you bring a proof from? They said, from your Torah. Your Torah says that you took this stuff. He said, okay, I'm going to bring a proof from the Torah as well. It says in the also in this week's Parsha, how long did Am Yisrael stay in Mitzrayim? 430 years. He says, okay, now let's work this out. 430 years times 600,000 men, give me their wages, write me out a check for that, and then we'll call it even. Then I'll give you back your money. Alexandros Mugdon said, okay, find him an answer. They couldn't find him an answer. Meaning that this Gemara suggests that the stuff that the Jews took from the Egyptians was basically payment for the many years of labor. Two problems we have with this. Number one, really? How much payment do you need for 600,000 men times 430 years? Okay, it wasn't 430 years, maybe it was only 210 years. The amount that one person can carry is not going to cover that wages. Secondly, really, is that all it's about? We could say that that's what Hashem promised to Abraham, to ensure Abraham that they won't go empty-handed. They will get some sort of compensation for their labor, possibly. But it seems that there's something deeper going on here. There is a discussion amongst the Mefarshim about whether this was asking for something to be lent to them for their travels in the Midbar, maybe for their Chag, the festival which Moshe and Aaron had been referring to the whole time, or whether it was supposed to be a gift. The Rashbam says categorically it was matana gemura v'chaluta, a complete gift. That's what they were asking for. And the Mitzrim gave it to them. Why? So the Chizkuni points out that we have a similar case of a gift being given by a master to a slave, as defined in the Psukim in Parshat Re'eh, regarding an Eved Ivri. When a Jew has an Eved Ivri, has a fellow Jew as his slave or servant, we know that he works for 6 years and then he goes. Yes, the Psukim in Parshat Mishpatim tells us what happens if he wants to stay for 7 years, but the standard is he leaves after 6. And the Torah tells us in Parshat Re'eh, Ha'anek ta'anik lo, mitzonacha u'migoracha u'mi'ikvecha. You should give him, meaning the master should not send the slave home empty-handed, but he should give him from his sheep, from his granary, from his winery. He should give him a set of gifts. Now that's not payment for the 6 years he was there, but it's a gift. Why is it so important that a master gives a slave a gift? One thing which defines a slave is the fact that he doesn't own anything. As the Mishnah tells us, Mashe kana eved kana rabo. What an eved, what a slave purchases or finds, belongs automatically to his master. A slave owns nothing. We can compare it to a person who goes to prison. A person in Law Lane who goes to prison, he gives in his clothes, he's given prison uniform. He sleeps on a prison bed. He eats prison food. He does work in the prison's workforce. Only when he gets out of prison and he then becomes a free man again is he given his clothes back. For the time he's in prison, he's like an Eved, he doesn't have ownership. So giving a slave something on their way out is a sign of their freedom. Or as I heard once, and I think this is a good mashal, I think Rav Avigdor mentioned it to me originally, this is what happens to the elves in Harry Potter. Meaning, if an elf is given clothes by his master, the elf goes free. Ayin Erech, see the example of Dobby, who was given a sock, which belonged to, if I remember, Lucius Malfoy. He was given a sock because Harry Potter managed to get it from him. This is the idea that an Eved now owns something that represents his freedom. So now if we go back to Yetziat Mitzrayim, for Am Yisrael to recognize their freedom, they have to own things. They have to be given something by their former masters. That demonstrates that the master, their enslaver, is now treating them as a real person who has zchuyot, who has his own benefits. And furthermore, it helps the Am Yisrael understand that they are now free people, they own something, and they have responsibility for what they own. Rabbi Sachs adds something additional. He points out that there's a pasuk in Parshat Kiteitzei which says, "Do not hate an Egyptian, lo t'ta'iv Mitzri, Ki ger hayita ba'artso, for you were a sojourner in their land, or a stranger in their land. Now that is a very strange statement. After all, do we owe gratitude to the Egyptians? We were slaves there. They were nasty to us. They enslaved us with hard labor for year after year after year. Yet we're still supposed to somehow get over that and remember that at one point we were sojourners, maybe beforehand. How do we achieve that? So Rabbi Sachs Zatzal suggests that this interaction between the Israelite and the Egyptian at the end of this whole event, at the point of Yetziat Mitzrayim, where the Israelites are asking for a gift and the Egyptians give the gift, creates a sense, or removes, what he says, removes hate from the Israelites. I would like to suggest that it also removes some sort of hate from the Egyptians. The Torah tells us that Hashem ensured that there would be chen, there would be favor of the Israelites in the Egyptians' eyes. This is the only time in Tanakh where it says that Hashem ensured that there was favor of one to another. V'Hashem natan et chen ha'am be'inei Mitzrayim. Hashem wanted the Mitzrayim also to look favorably on the Jews. Maybe what Hashem was hoping for here is a new slate, a new period in world history. As Rabbi Sachs points out, the message could not be more germane to our situation in the early 21st century. In an age riven by ethnic and religious conflict, the message of the Torah rings true in our time. To be free, you have to let go of hate. So yes, Am Yisrael had to let go of hate, but maybe the Egyptians too had to let go of hate and recognize the new status that the Israelites have. We could also suggest that the Jews are supposed to look in the Egyptians in a slightly different light. After all, Paro held out to the end, but the Chartumim, the sorcerers, gave up and said Etzba Elokim Hi already after Makat Kinim. At the beginning of this week's Parsha, Avdei Pharaoh say to Paro, don't keep going with this. Haterem Teda Ki Avda Mitzrayim. Don't you know that Mitzrayim are going to perish? And if we go back to Parshat Shemot, we have Bat Paro, the first righteous Gentile, who obviously didn't agree with Paro's policies and was prepared in a own little rebellion to save a Jewish child, an Israelite child. She did not know then that he would come back and save and bring the entire nation out of slavery. Maybe we're supposed to recognize that not everybody here is to blame amongst the Egyptians, and what Hashem is trying to create in this little interaction of request of gift between the Israelites and the Egyptians is hope for a better future. Yes, it does somewhat blow up in next week's Parsha, but again, because Paro insisted that they have to go and chase Am Yisrael, and they have to go and chase them and then kill them in the Yam Suf, that didn't work out so well for him. But the glimmer of hope that can happen based on this exchange of gifts is something which possibly Hashem was hoping for, and maybe we can look for in our modern age. Thank you, and Shabbat Shalom.